What if the pursuit of power left you with everything, yet nothing at all? Imagine a world where every decision you made brought wealth, yet each achievement led to a more bottomless emptiness. Such is the story of Alexander Carter, who seemed to have it all but realized he had built his empire at a profound cost. Join us as we unravel a tale of unexpected connection, heartache, and transformation, where the warmth of a child's trust challenges the ironclad heart of a ruthless billionaire. In tonight's story, we explore the mystery of human connection, the shadows of regret, and the road to redemption. What will it take for Alexander to find true fulfillment? This journey is bound to surprise you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel to never miss the powerful stories that bring life's most challenging questions to light. As Alexander Carter looked out from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, he saw the glittering cityscape sprawling below him, a reminder of the empire he had built brick by brick, deal by ruthless deal. At 53, Alexander had amassed an extraordinary level of wealth, a legacy of influence that stretched across industries and continents. And yet, standing in the silence of his opulent office, he felt a hollow ache, a sense that all he had conquered meant nothing. On nights like these, when he couldn't shake the emptiness, he would pour himself a drink, flip through memories of his past, and ask the question he feared most. What had he gained? Tonight, though, would be different. A message from his security team interrupted his reverie, alerting him to a disturbance near one of his downtown properties. Usually, Alexander would delegate such a trivial matter, but something unexplainable drove him to handle it himself. He shrugged on his coat and made his way to the scene. As his sleek black car glided through the city's shadows, Alexander found himself in a part of town he seldom ventured. The city he ruled felt foreign here. The gleaming skyscrapers replaced by worn-out buildings and dimly lit streets. The headlights caught a small, shivering figure on the sidewalk, a child, no older than 6, clutching a baby bundled in a threadbare blanket. Alexander's breath caught. He remained frozen behind the wheel for a moment, his instincts battling his emotions. But something in the child's wide, wary eyes spoke to him. It was a look that pierced through his defenses, one he couldn't ignore. He cut the engine and stepped out, feeling the bite of the cold air as he approached. The little boy looked up, clutching the baby closer, his face showing fear and guarded hope. "Hello," Alexander said softly, trying to make his presence less intimidating. "Are you all right? Where are your parents?" The boy's gaze remained fixed, suspicion clouding his young face. He finally murmured his name, "Leo." Alexander nodded, sensing the layers of mistrust that had likely built up over time. Leo's protective grip around the baby told Alexander this wasn't just a typical lost child. Something was very wrong. He gently asked, "And who's this?" Leo whispered back, "Owen, my brother." Alexander's heart stirred, a long-dormant impulse emerging from within. "It's too cold for you and Owen to be out here. Would you let me take you somewhere warm?" Leo hesitated, his young eyes studying Alexander. But the promise of warmth and safety won out. He finally nodded. That night, Alexander's car carried 2 young strangers into the safety of his mansion, a decision that would unravel his life as he knew it. Alexander returned to his mansion, the children in tow, feeling the weight of the choice he had made. His housekeeper, Miss Harlow, a stern woman who had served him for years, eyed him with surprise as he entered with the 2 children. She whispered, "Mr. Carter, are you sure about this? The authorities—" "Not yet, Ms. Harlow," Alexander replied, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He could see his choice of the little boy clinging to his arm and the unspoken fears in his eyes. "Let's give him a warm bed tonight. We'll figure out what to do in the morning." Leo clutched Owen close in the guest room, looking around the grand room with wide eyes. The room, designed for lavish guests, now felt too large, too overwhelming for such small children. Alexander felt discomfort, sensing how out of place they seemed in his carefully ordered world of wealth. Kneeling to Leo's level, he said, "You're safe here. Try to get some sleep." "All right." Leo nodded, his eyes still searching Alexander's face as though trying to discern his true intentions. As Alexander left, closing the door softly behind him, he stood in the hallway momentarily, his mind racing. The decisions he had made to build his empire had rarely kept him up at night. Yet this choice, to take in 2 abandoned children, filled him with an unease he couldn't shake. In the early hours, Alexander was jolted awake by the unfamiliar sound of a baby crying. The children were stirring. He found Ms. Harlow in the kitchen, trying to coax a reluctant Owen to eat while Leo watched protectively. Alexander hesitated, feeling oddly like a stranger in his own home. But something in the way Leo clung to his little brother, his quiet strength, ignited a sense of responsibility within him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. Later that morning, as Alexander was beginning to question his own sanity, the doorbell rang. Miss Harlow hurried to answer it, returning with a pale face. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, "the police are here." Alexander's pulse quickened as he entered the foyer, coming face to face with 2 officers, Detective Amelia Brooks and her partner, Ryan Lawson. Detective Brooks was a strict woman, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Mr. Carter," she began, "we received a report that a man matching your description was seen picking up 2 children last night." Alexander felt Leo's terrified gaze from behind him and quickly stepped forward. "Of course, detectives," he said smoothly, masking his apprehension. "Please, let's discuss this privately." He led them to his study, where he carefully recounted the previous night's events, omitting the children's emotional state out of respect for their privacy. Brooks studied him, clearly skeptical. "While I appreciate your concern, Mr. Carter," she said finally, "taking children off the street is a serious matter. We have protocols to follow." Alexander could feel Leo's anxious gaze and instinctively placed himself between the boy and the detectives. "I understand, detective, but if you allow them some peace today, I'll ensure they receive the help they need. They've been through enough." After a tense moment, Detective Brooks nodded. "We'll arrange for a child psychologist to speak with them tomorrow. But understand, Mr. Carter, you are part of an ongoing investigation. The children must remain here, and we'll follow up with you." As they left, Alexander was flooded with relief and dread. He had bought them time, but knew this was only the beginning. Leo's fearful gaze and how he clutched his little brother revealed a story far darker than he'd imagined. As Alexander sat in his study that evening, the weight of the day's events pressed heavily on him. Leo's last name, Blackwood, kept repeating in his mind, its familiarity nagging at him. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon an old photograph on his desk, a picture of himself and Dominic Blackwood, his former friend and business partner, from over a decade ago. A chilling realization washed over him. Could Leo and Owen be connected to Dominic? The following day, Detective Brooks returned, her expression tense. "Mr. Carter, we've made an unsettling connection. The children's last name is Blackwood." She let the implication hang in the air. Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. "Dominic Blackwood," Detective Brooks continued. "After your fallout, Dominic disappeared from the public eye, but re-emerged in some very dark circles. We've been investigating his activities for years, yet he's always managed to evade us. And now, it seems, his children have turned up in your care." The implications were staggering. Alexander tried to mask his shock, but Leo sensed his distress, edging closer to Owen protectively. "Are we in danger?" Leo asked, his voice barely audible. Alexander crouched down, meeting Leo's gaze, his voice filled with newfound warmth. "Not while I'm Beanamize. I won't let anything happen to you or your brother." But as he straightened, he realized the enormity of the situation. He had become entangled in a web of his past, which held unimaginable risks. For the first time, he felt an overwhelming need to protect his empire and 2 young lives. The road ahead was filled with peril. Yet Alexander felt a flicker of hope, a chance, perhaps, to redeem himself. The following days were unlike anything Alexander Carter had experienced in his carefully structured life. The mansion, typically a place of quiet order, was now filled with new sounds, the faint cries of a baby at dawn, the cautious footsteps of a young boy exploring unfamiliar rooms, and Alexander's conflicted thoughts. Leo and Owen's presence disrupted everything he had once held in place. Yet he strangely found himself drawn to the chaos. One night, Alexander paused at the door as he went down the long corridor to the guest room. The dim light from the hallway cast soft shadows across the floor. He heard gentle breathing mixed with muffled whispers as Leo reassured his baby brother. "It's okay. Owen, we're safe now. I won't let anyone take you away." Alexander's heart clenched at the innocence and courage in Leo's voice. He had never anticipated that two fragile souls, built on steel and ambition, could soften his life. A sense of protectiveness, an alien feeling for someone as reserved as him, rose within. Tentatively, he knocked on the door. Leo froze, his wide eyes reflecting a hint of fear before softening as he recognized Alexander. "Is everything all right?" Alexander asked, keeping his voice gentle. He wasn't sure how to talk to a child, much less one who had faced so much. Leo nodded but hesitated, glancing at the shadows in the room's corners. Alexander sensed his reluctance, and without thinking, he sat on the edge of the bed. "When I was young, I used to be scared of shadows, too," he said, looking around the room thoughtfully. "But then I realized sometimes they're just reminders of things we're trying to forget." Leo studied him, his small face still filled with worry but touched by curiosity. "Were you scared too?" he asked softly. Alexander nodded, surprised by the truth of his own words. "Yes, more often than I care to admit." In that quiet moment, they shared a mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement that the shadows in their lives were not so different. And for the first time, Alexander realized that the empty rooms of his mansion, adorned with expensive but meaningless artifacts, had finally found purpose. The days passed, and Alexander was easing into his role as an unexpected protector. Every morning, he would greet Leo and Owen with a hesitant smile, often finding Ms. Harlow helping with breakfast as they made their way to the kitchen. But something about Ms. Harlow's behavior had subtly shifted. Her usual efficiency seemed tinged with an edge of discomfort, her glances toward the children tense and fleeting. One evening, Alexander noticed a faint light under Ms. Harlow's door after putting the children to bed. Curiosity tugged at him, a silent urge to unravel the sense of unease that had settled in the mansion. He leaned closer, straining to hear her voice's low, hurried tones as she spoke into her phone. "This can't go on. Not much longer. He's beginning to suspect." Ms. Harlow whispered. Alexander froze, a chill running down his spine, laced with urgency. Her words hinted at something far more profound than he'd imagined. In that instant, his trust in Ms. Harlow began to unravel. A woman who had worked loyally for years was shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Summoning all his resolve, Alexander pushed open the door. Ms. Harlow's face paled, her phone slipping from her hand. "Mr. Carter," she stammered, attempting to recover her usual poise. I was just... Save it," Alexander replied, his voice cold and unforgiving. "How long has this been going on, Eleanor?" The look in her eyes was a mix of fear and guilt. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time in their long relationship, Ms. Harlow seemed genuinely vulnerable. "They threatened me," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "They knew things about me, about my past. They said if I didn't cooperate." "And what about the children?" Alexander demanded, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Were you going to hand them over?" Her eyes filled with unshed tears as she shook her head. "I never wanted to hurt them. I thought I could find a way out, that maybe I could protect them. But Daniel, he's not the man he used to be. He's dangerous, Mr. Carter. More dangerous than you realize." The revelation hit Alexander with a staggering force. The walls of his carefully controlled life began to close in, each secret Ms. Harlow shared adding weight to a growing web of betrayal. But despite the feeling of betrayal, a new determination ignited within him. If Daniel Blackwood wanted to harm these children, he'd have to go through Alexander first. After Ms. Harlow's confession and her subsequent arrest, Alexander felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The children were no longer simply wards. They had become a part of him, a part of his life he was unwilling to surrender. Detective Amelia Brooks, who had been handling the case with an unyielding professionalism, suggested a temporary safe house. On the drive there, the environment began to shift. Towering skyscrapers led to winding roads lined with tall pines and quiet stillness. Alexander's mansion had always been a luxury fortress. But this place, this secluded cabin in the woods, offered something he had long forgotten: peace. As they settled into the safe house, Alexander spent more time with Amelia. Unlike his business deals and polished facades, Amelia's world was raw and honest, a sharp contrast to everything he had known. She was a complex mix of compassion and fierce determination. Someone who had chosen to fight for justice even as she confronted the darker sides of humanity. One evening, after Owen had finally drifted to sleep and Leo was occupied with a book, Alexander and Amelia found themselves alone on the cabin's rustic porch, surrounded by the scent of pine and the distant hum of night creatures. The stars overhead stretched like a quiet promise, their light flickering through gaps in the thick canopy. "You're good with them," Amelia said, breaking the silence with her warm and curious tone. "It's not what I expected." Alexander chuckled softly, feeling a weight lift in her presence. "What did you expect, detective? A heartless businessman who'd see children as liabilities?" Her laugh was soft, but it warmed the night air around them. "Something like that." She paused, her expression turning reflective. "But I see a man willing to risk everything for two little souls he barely knows. And it surprises me." They exchanged a long look that held the weight of mutual understanding and perhaps something more, a shared vulnerability neither had expected. In that quiet moment, Alexander realized he wasn't alone in his transformation. The children weren't just changing him. They were forcing him to question everything he had known about himself, his past, and his future. Looking into Amelia's eyes, he felt a spark, a connection, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, but both knew too much was at stake. Amelia turned her gaze back to the stars with a reluctant smile, and Alexander followed suit, allowing the silence to stretch between them, rich and charged with possibility. Life at the safe house settled into a quiet routine, but beneath the surface, tension simmered, despite the peace of their new surroundings. Alexander could see that Leo remained vigilant, his tiny body tense and guarded, his gaze constantly darting to shadows that held memories of darker times. The nightmares were less frequent, but they left the boy shaken when they came. One cold morning, after a tough night, Alexander found Leo sitting alone on the porch steps, his small frame silhouetted against the rising sun. Alexander sat beside him, noticing how the boy's fingers twisted nervously in his lap. "Bad dream?" Alexander asked gently, his voice low. Leo nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I did something bad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The admission struck Alexander unexpectedly, but he kept his tone steady. "You can tell me, Leo. Whatever it is, you're safe here." Leo's shoulders trembled slightly, and when he looked up at Alexander, his eyes were filled with a haunting mixture of fear and guilt. "The night we ran away, I was trying to protect Owen. Father was hurting Mother, and I found his gun." Alexander felt his heart clench, understanding dawning painfully as Leo's words sank in. This small, frightened boy had taken on the role of protector, a burden no child should ever bear. Leo continued, his voice trembling. "I pointed it at him. I wanted to protect her, to make him stop. But when I fired, he just looked at me and fell." The weight of Leo's confession filled the morning air, leaving them both silent. Alexander fought to maintain his composure, his heart breaking for the boy who had been forced to make an impossible choice. Gently, he placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, grounding him in the present. "Leo," he said, his voice filled with reassurance, "what you did was incredibly brave. You were protecting your family, which takes more strength than most people." Leo's tears fell freely now, years of guilt and fear pouring out. Alexander held him, letting the boy release the emotions he had kept hidden for so long. At that moment, Alexander realized he had been given a second chance, not just to protect these children, but to show them a life where fear and violence had no place. As they sat together, the rising sun casting a warm glow over the landscape, Alexander made a silent vow. He would keep these children safe, no matter the cost. The guilt he had buried over his ruthless past felt insignificant compared to the responsibility he now held in his arms. He would not allow their lives to be haunted by shadows. Not while he still drew breath. A tense resolve settled over the safe house as the morning fog lifted from the surrounding woods. Alexander's mansion, with its cold luxury, had faded in his mind, replaced by the warmth of this place, the rough wood and rustic charm creating a sanctuary for the children. But the tranquility couldn't last. Detective Amelia Brooks and Judge Harold Winters uncovered a chilling connection. Dominic Blackwood, Leo's father, had wielded his influence across sectors, entangling judges, police officers, and even corporate leaders. His reach goes deeper than we thought. Alexander, Judge Winters had confided late one evening. Dominic's associates have been watching you for years, waiting for the right moment to leverage your empire. Judge Winters' face, usually stern and composed, showed a hint of sorrow. They're not just after control of your company. They want the power it represents. In the dim glow of the cabin's living room, Alexander felt a cold anger simmering within. He had once been like Dominic, navigating the treacherous waters of influence and control. But now, the stakes were far more personal. He looked over to where Leo and Owen were fast asleep, their tiny bodies tangled in the warmth of soft blankets, and made a decision. He would draw out Dominic's associates, every last one of them. What do you propose? Amelia's voice was low but determined, her gaze fixed on him, unwavering. We set a trap, Alexander replied. His jaw set. I'll announce my resignation. Imply I'm ready to hand over control of the company. It will force their hand. Amelia hesitated, concern flickering in her eyes. And the children? Alexander's heart ached, but he remained resolute. We'll move them somewhere safe, away from all of this. But this ends now. I owe it to them. As the three strategized, Alexander felt a new purpose stirring within. For years, he had fought to conquer markets, to win battles defined by numbers and bottom lines. But now, his struggle was for something far more precious: freedom, safety, and the promise of a future for two vulnerable children who had unknowingly become his entire world. The following day, he dawned cold and overcast, as though the heavens sensed the gravity of what lay ahead. Alexander arrived at his corporate headquarters, the imposing glass and steel structure a reminder of the empire he had built and the cage it had become. He entered the lobby with Amelia by his side, her professional attire concealing her badge and weapon, ready to act if the situation turned dangerous. The boardroom buzzed with murmurs as executives and board members exchanged worried glances. Alexander's sudden call for an emergency meeting had unsettled them, each one wondering if the rumors were true, that their powerful, unstoppable CEO was stepping down. As Alexander took his place at the head of the table, he felt their eyes upon him, searching, questioning. Thank you all for joining me on such short notice, he began, his voice calm but edged with intensity. I have spent decades building this company, making sacrifices and decisions that were not always easy. But recent events have led me to question the path we are on. And so, I have decided it may be time for a change in leadership. A ripple of shock moved through the room, followed by whispers and exchanged glances. With keen observation, he saw the subtle shifts in posture from several individuals. James Harrow, a senior vice president. Among them, Harrow's face paled, then turned a dangerous shade of red. This is outrageous. Carter, Harrow shouted, his voice trembling with poorly concealed rage. You can't just walk in here and throw everything away. Alexander's gaze narrowed, his tone like ice. I haven't thrown anything away, Harrow, but I know exactly what you and a select few others in this room have been involved in. His words hung heavy, an unspoken accusation that silenced the room. In a flash, Harrow pulled a gun from his jacket, pointing it directly at Alexander. Gasps filled the room as people ducked and shielded themselves. The tension in the air almost tangible. Alexander braced himself, but before he could react, Judge Winters, posing as a new board member, tackled Harrow from behind, wresting the gun from his grip. As police officers flooded the room, Amelia rushed to Alexander's side, relief and alarm mingling in her eyes. "Are you all right?" She asked, her hand on his shoulder. Alexander nodded, still processing the narrow escape. "Yes, thanks to all of you." He watched as several board members, those identified as Dominic's collaborators, were led away in handcuffs, their faces masks of anger and humiliation. As the dust settled, Alexander felt a strange calm wash over him. The empire he had built, once a fortress of ambition and influence, was crumbling in his hands. But this time, he didn't feel fear or loss. He felt liberated, knowing that the path ahead was free of corruption and that his actual fight had only just begun. The weeks following the dramatic boardroom takedown were a whirlwind of media scrutiny, legal proceedings, and the monumental task of restructuring the company. But through it all, Alexander's focus remained unwavering, ensuring the safety and future of Leo and Owen. The cold, empty mansion transformed under his hands. The once clinical rooms now held color, warmth, and the sound of laughter, things he had never imagined he'd welcome. One afternoon, Alexander found Leo in the study, absorbed in a book, his small face relaxed and unguarded. It was a rare moment when the boy seemed at ease, and Alexander couldn't help but feel gratitude for the chance to offer him this peace. "Leo," he said softly, joining him, "how would you feel about staying here? Permanently?" Leo's gaze lifted, his eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. "Do you mean with you?" Alexander nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, with me. Only if that's what you want." "Of course." The boy's face softened, a glimmer of happiness breaking through the years of fear. He whispered, "I'd like that, Dad." The word hung in the air, filling Alexander with a joy he hadn't known was possible. Leo, this fragile boy who had braved the darkness, was choosing him, choosing to let him be the father he had never thought he could be. With Amelia's support, Alexander began the adoption process, determined to make their bond legal and irrevocable. And on a crisp autumn afternoon, with the golden leaves falling around them, the papers were signed, marking the beginning of their official life together. The simple joys of family life blossomed. Leo's tentative smiles, Owen's laughter, Amelia's gentle presence by his side. It was a family shaped by resilience, trust, and love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. As they watched Leo blow out the candles on his first birthday cake as a Carter, Alexander realized he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. A year later, the Carter mansion stood as a testament to transformation. Where once only cold ambition had reigned, now there was warmth, laughter, and a sense of belonging that Alexander could never have predicted. The long, empty halls were filled with photos of Leo and Owen, moments of joy captured in frames that lined the walls. Amelia's presence was woven into every corner, her steady love and compassion grounding their family. On a chilly morning, as they all gathered around the breakfast table, Alexander caught Amelia's gaze, a silent question in his eyes. She smiled, a hint of tears glistening, and slightly nodded. Standing, Alexander addressed Leo and Owen, who looked up in surprise. "Today, I have something special to share with you both," Alexander said, his voice filled with emotion. "Amelia and I, we've decided to make this family official." He took a small velvet box from his pocket, revealing an engagement ring. "Amelia, you've been more than a partner in all this. You've shown me a world beyond power and wealth. You've shown me love. Will you marry me?" Leo and Owen's faces lit up, their excitement evident as they clapped and cheered. Amelia's answer was a whispered, tearful yes, as she slipped the ring onto her finger. Their family was no longer a fragile arrangement, but a promise a future solidified by love, courage, and sacrifice. As they walked through the mansion later that evening, Alexander paused in front of the large bay windows, looking at the vast expanse of land that once symbolized his isolation. Amelia stood beside him, her arm linked through his, Leo and Owen playing nearby. "We made it," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "You found a way to protect them. Us all." Alexander's gaze softened as he watched the boys, their laughter filling the room. "They saved me, Amelia," he replied, his voice choked with emotion, "in ways I can't begin to describe." As the sun set, casting a warm glow across their home, Alexander knew that this simple, profound joy was what he had fought for. He had finally found his true wealth in the family surrounding him, a love that would carry them forward into the years to come. The ruthless businessman was replaced by a man who had learned that the most accurate success was found not in power or possessions, but in the people he loved. And for Alexander Carter, nothing in the world mattered more.